How did General Vandegrift plan to defend Henderson Field from a major Japanese assault? We'll look at the development of the defensive position around Henderson Field.
This is the Principles of War podcast, professional military education for junior officers and senior NCOs.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Principles of War. This episode, number 146, is the 12th episode in our series looking at the Guadalcanal land campaign with our resident expert, Dave Holland. Today we're going to be looking at the tactical problem that Vandegrift has. He has to secure Henderson Field in order to allow the Cactus Air Force to conduct air operations. He, like so many commanders before and after him, has limited resources. So how is he going to balance a series of important priorities? So we'll get right into it with the defence of Henderson Field with Dave Holland. So for the defenders, the perimeter's gotten significantly larger because it goes out to the east bank of the Matanikau now, doesn't it? So who was it within the perimeter and how was the defence laid out?
Yeah, so Vandegrift had divided his perimeter into sectors to make it more controllable. So generally ideally you would have 2 battalions on the line, 1 battalion back, 2 battalions on line, and that's how it worked. And the 5th Marine Regiment was on the western side from like Cookham with the coast into the bottom of the Kuma Ridges. Then the 1st Marine Regiment, when the 164th landed, the 1st Marine Regiment was on the east side near Alligator Creek when they fought from the very beginning. So they took those guys and moved them up on Kuma Ridges, which is, like I said, a very vital, important point. They knew that if the Japanese reached that, they'd be in trouble. So they put the 1st Marines there. So on the western perimeter, they had the 5th Marines and the 1st Marines. So 2 regiments on those ridges. Then you got the Lunga River. Then across the Lunga River, you got Edson's Ridge, or Bloody Ridge. So from there, 2,500 yards east, you went to a place called Coffin Corner, which is like a big grass field. And that was covered by the 7th Marine Regiment and the 164th. And then when you get there, it went due north and followed the Elu River all the way to the coast again. And that was covered by the 164th too. So the 164th had 2 battalions on line with a battalion in the rear. Now, on the Matanikau, like I said, you had 2 battalions forward deployed in a fishhook line. There are about 3 miles between that fishhook line and the perimeter. So that was a big gap. So that was loosely covered by patrols. Vandegrift took that risk to put those 2 battalions forward deployed with the possibility they may get cut off, but he couldn't risk losing Matanikau. That was too important to give to the Japanese, as we see, because that's what the Japanese wanted it. If they would have took it, then they wouldn't have had to go through the jungle. So yeah, that was how the Marines' perimeter was. And then the perimeter, they had enclosed bunkers, had barbed wire line, because in September when the 7th Marines came, they had all this barbed wire and they had entrenching tools and kits, and they could start to dig in. They did. And then they had the artillery. Once again, they had the artillery in the center, and they had the whole place pre-registered. Now, for artillery, they had the tank companies ready to go for counterattacks. And then at that stage, at the start of the campaign, Vandegrift thought his main threat was from the sea and to the flanks. But what they've done now, he's pulled the infantry units off the coast and put them on the flanks. And the units covering the coast, like your engineers, your Amtraks, and your pioneers, would man defensive positions on the coast, because they didn't expect the Japanese to do a full-on amphibious assault, because the Japanese at that stage had done two attacks on the flanks, and that's where expected. On the mouth of Matanikau, that's where the Americans expected their main attack, Japanese attack, would come from. So at the mouth of Matanikau, they made that the most strongest position in the campaign, American position there. So they had bunkers, anti-tank guns, 75 millimeter mounted Amtraks. They had improvised landmines. They had the whole area from the mouth all the way to Point Cruz pre-registered with something like 44 guns in a small area in ladders. I don't know if I spoke about this before. What they did, they'd set their firing plans in ladders. Each ladder would go, I think, 800 yards up and down with 50 yards overlapping. And they were firing in a space about 500 yards wide, about 800 yards long. Each had 50-yard ladders, overlapping ladders. So all pre-registered. So if they had to start firing, they would fire up and down that ladder with saturated fire, 44 guns, 105 millimeters and 75 millimeters. And they knew any attack came across there would be just pulverized. In fact, Pedro de Valle said, he's the artillery commander. He said the plan was an instrument for destruction. That's what he said. It was an instrument for destruction if anything tried to attack across that. And we'll see. He got to use that a bit later.
So you mentioned the 164th US Infantry Regiment. That was a National Guard unit and a part of the Matanikau Division. What were they like? They hadn't seen combat?
No. I'll take a step back. I forgot to mention, and this plays in a part, Vandegrift and his planners expected Japanese attack across the mouth of Matanikau. The southern line in that thick jungle, that had dug in so hard on it, and they'd put almost every bunker had a machine gun in it. They had all these excess machine guns, so they put every bunker a machine gun. That area was so much of a threat because Vandegrift was counting on these, and Vandegrift actually said any attacking unit that would move through all that thick jungle to get to us will be so depleted that we'd be able to handle them. They'd be so retreated. So that was what they were counting on. So, yeah, just leave that thought in your head. So go back to your question, 164th Infantry Regiment, yeah, they were a National Guard unit. So they were, due to the restructuring before the war, the four regimental divisions, square divisions became a triangular division. So a lot of these divisions had these ex-orphaned regiments. So you went from 4 regiments to 3. So the 164th, I forgot what division it was in, but anyway, it was detached. And they took these detached units, and some of these guys were the first ones to go and garrison the South Pacific on these islands to protect the Australian-American chain. So the 164th, the 132nd, and 182nd were all National Guard units, and they went to New Caledonia. Initially went to Australia, I think there for a couple of weeks, then to New Caledonia. And there, with some independent artillery units and some engineers, a guy called Major General Alexander Patch, put them together on New Caledonia, and they formed the Matanikau Division, which is the American New Caledonia Division. Had a PFC come up with that name. It was a big contest. What do you want? Probably a couple of beers or something. But he came up with that name, the Matanikau Division. And that was what the 164th was attached to. So at the time, Major General Millard Harmon, who was the Major General, he was the Army Commander of South Pacific. You had Ghormley, who was the Commander of South Pacific, Naval Commander, or the Commander of South Pacific. He was going to use the 164th once again to go to Santa Cruz Island in Nadini. They were still trying to put some forces in Nadini. I think we spoke about it in the first episode when they tried to put the 2nd Marines there. So Turner and Ghormley still trying to put some guys in Nadini. So Harmon says, look, the Marines need some help. You know, this is getting to be an apex of the campaign. The 164th, we know some more Army units are moving in to New Caledonia. Instead of sending the 164th to Nadini, can we just send him straight to Guadalcanal? And he pleaded and begged, and he got his wish. And I think Ghormley finally seen the value of what he's trying to say. So he took a big risk, which was good. He showed some bit of moral courage, Harmon, and got the 164th sent in there to the relief of the Marines. Because the Marines initially thought, they were told, look, you're Marine, you're assault troops, you're amphibious assault, you're going to go in, you're going to take Guadalcanal, and then the Army will come in and garrison it and relieve, and you go off and assault another island. And that's what they were told. That didn't work out to be because there was no Army units to relieve them because the Army was trying to protect that southern line or that southern communication. Yeah, so the 164th National Guard, North Dakota National Guard, big, tough, raw farm boys, they called them. They were filled in with some draftees because they'd been federated active duty for a whole year by then, training up. And then some of the, what you'd expect, some of the officers and NCOs were kind of politically appointed. You know, they all knew each other. Like one guy might have been the mayor of the town, and he was company commander or the banker, or, you know, they're civilians. They're reserve civilians. And then the wartime came, and some of the training cut out some of those guys, and they were replaced by regular officers and NCOs, and some of the draftees started filling in. But to the core, they were still the National Guard type units, which you would see around the Pacific and Europe, the first units to go in. And then we'll see in the campaign that they had some learning processes, just like the regular units too, but probably to a greater extent, some of these National Guard guys. But there, yeah, a lot of them were farm guys and with Swedish names, Norwegian names, because there's what a lot of Swedes and Norwegians went when they settled in America. the 164th. But yeah, they had a good commander too, Bryant Moore. He was a regular West Point guy. Their old commander had been kind of relieved or sent home on New Caledonia because he was old and a few other things. There's a lot of politics involved there. But yeah, Bryant Moore was a pretty switched-on commander. So yeah, they weren't a bad unit. In fact, I think they were, I can't put my finger on it, I can't verify it, but I think there was a reason why they were the first ones sent from the division. I think they were the best ones that Patch had, so he sent the 164th in. They had M1 Grands. They were equipped with M1 Grands.
Do you want to talk a bit about the Grand?
Yeah, well, the Grand was, semi-automatic rifle. Well, the Marines at the time, you can't go black and white. I think we've already mentioned it before. The Marines majority, because all the rifle regiments had the Springfield 1903, the bolt action rifles. The Marines were in the transition period of going from the Grands to the 03s. Some of the Marine units, they were issuing the Grands in 1941, and they were issuing them mainly to the Guard units and the Guard type units first. That's why you'll see 3rd Defense Battalion, they landed on 7th of August, all equipped with M1 Grands. But the majority of Marines had the 1903 Springfields, and when the Army had the M1 Grands, which is a semi-automatic rifle, fires 8 shots, and one of the most famous weapons in history, or definitely in World War II, M1 Grand. But the Marines were in transition period to get them. In fact, when the 8th Marines landed on the 4th of November on Guadalcanal, one company out of every battalion had M1 Grands, and the other ones had 03s because they're just transitioning. They're just trying to get them to the Marines on the front lines. But yeah, so they had a little more firepower than a normal Marine rifle squad.
So looking at the defences for Henderson Field, was there a lot of engineering support? Did the Seabees play a role in preparing the defences? Not
so much the defences. When the Seabees landed, the 6th Seabee Battalion, Construction Battalion, landed on 1 September. And their main job was to, as you guess, build up the airfields, which is one of the myths of Guadalcanal. The Seabees didn't finish Henderson Field. The 1st Marine Engineer Battalion finished Henderson Field on the 16th of August. But the Seabees really built it up. The Seabees built the roads up, they built bridges. So mainly infrastructures and airfields. That was their main thing. They didn't they'd go up and with bulldozers and dig trenches, and because that was all by hand. And they built roads to the place for supply, but that was their main role, is build infrastructure, roads and stuff like that.
Now looking at, so back to the Japanese now and their plan for the attack, was Hayakatake also concerned that he thought that there was a airfield being built at Coley Point, and was that part of the plan as well?
I've seen different versions of that. They suspected an airfield was being built or potentially could be built there because it's a great place to build an airfield. In one stage, when you will see at the end of this battle, the Japanese were going to send their troops to start building one at Coley Point, which I found strange because Coley Point's only 12 miles away from the Marine perimeter. And I just couldn't see the Japanese building an airfield 12 miles away from the American airfield. It just didn't make sense. But there's a lot of conflicting information there. So, yeah, they knew the Americans could potentially be building one there. Now, at the time, they were calling it the crash field in that area because it's nice, flat kunai grass. And on both sides, the Japanese and the Americans were using it mainly the Americans using it as a crash field if they couldn't get into an emergency crash field. Like say they're taking off, they couldn't land back, they just land there, or coming in after dogfights or whatever, or coming in for missions that land in those fields. So the Japanese potentially could send airplanes there. There was starting to be an American build-up, but in October, not so much. We'll see in November. That's a different story in December when they actually started building airfields. But at the time, there was some intelligence to say the Americans possibly could build one there.
Now, Hayakatake had Moriyama and the Sendai Division travelling to Henderson Field by a trail that they would cut into the jungle as they were going. Do you want to talk about the Moriyama Trail?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. The actual trail, it started at Kukumbana, and Kukumbana is 5 miles west of the Matanikau, and there's a good trailhead. So it started there, and it was going to go south. Initially, it went south for a few miles, and then it basically cut southeast, and then it went east. basically circumventing, crossing the upper reaches of the Matanikau River and circumventing Mount Austin. And then it got into the ravines of Mount Austin, and then it hit the upper Lunga River. And then when it hit the upper Lunga River, they crossed over to the east bank, and then you would move straight north and heading basically toward Edson's Ridge or Bloody Ridge. So they sent engineers out. The first of it, the track's not too bad. It goes through coconut groves, and it's actually quite a nice track until you start going into those deep jungle ravines just south of Mount Austin. The road is about 15 miles of cutting back and forth. It's trying to go off here, about 11 miles as the crow flies, about 15 miles of track on it. 3 to 5 feet wide. They try to cut like a tunnel, if you would probably envision, through the vegetation. The reason they did that, they always try to keep overhead cover because this was going to be a secret planned move. And they knew the American planes, if they started cutting a big, wider trail, that they would be seen. And they wanted to go far south to avoid the American patrols and the air. So it was all going to be a secret deal. So when I said road, it's more of a trail. It's a foot trail. You aren't going to bring any trucks or even, they didn't have mules, but you wouldn't bring any trucks or any type of wheeled cart down it. Everything had to be man-packed.
Hyakutake had not been long on Guadalcanal, and neither would have Murayama, because that's actually quite a difficult... The jungle is very dense, and cutting a trail through that would have been incredibly time-consuming, wouldn't it?
Yeah, 5 days. They envisioned 5 days. It would take them 5 days to move and cut it. We'll see that's not the case.
Absolutely, yes. So one would suspect that the reconnaissance for that move hadn't been overly well thought out, because the timings here are absolutely critical. Everything comes down to the timings, partially for the coordination and also just for the fact that the longer it takes, the worse the Japanese situation is. The soldiers who were actually walking the trail, each soldier was carrying one artillery round, and they weren't carrying a lot of rations, were they? So they were limited in the amount of time that they were going to be viable in the field.
Yeah, the reports I've seen, it all varies. I read one account said 12 days worth of rations, but that's not the case, because once you start reading the actual diary accounts of the Japanese, and I read another official account that was 5 days worth of rations, which makes more sense because they're only envisioning you're going to be there 5 days. And it'll take them 5 days to walk it because, you're looking, 11 miles? I mean, how long does it take to go 11 miles? Even though they did factor in, this is thick terrain. But in fact, the 29th Regiment had set a marching record in Japan. It was well known for one of the fastest units, one of the best units, pack marching and just physical fitness. These are all, like I said, Japanese didn't send their B teams to Guadalcanal. These are all their A teams. This is the best they had. The best units they had went to Guadalcanal. So yeah, they thought 5 days, 11 miles. We can make that. We've done it everywhere else. So yeah, 5 days. I think 5 days worth of rations rather than 12 was the case. Yeah, and each one, I don't know if each soldier had an artillery round. I've read that a few times because I think it was divided up quite a bit. In fact, to this day, you can walk the route if you can, parts of it. Most of it's just overgrown. And you'd find 70 and mainly 75 millimeter shells scattered all up and down. So you can see, you know how young privates are. Screw this. I'm not taking this thing. That first break I get, dig a little hole, boom, goes in there, and it's less weight I got to carry. So yeah, you'll see a lot of that scattered up and down the track, and plus the guns too. And because they broke each one of these guns down. I've got the stats and the figures and things because it differentiates. Each regiment had a battery attached to it. And a battery, they were taking the top 41s, 75 millimeter mountain howitzers, and they had a few Dutch ones too. I haven't confirmed this, but I read a couple of accounts. They had some Dutch guns. They captured Dutch guns. They had a couple of 75 millimeter Dutch guns. So each regiment, so you have 3 regiments up. I'd say anywhere between 10 to 12 guns they were carrying, 75 millimeters, all broken down and man-packed in, which is hard. And we'll see, I think only about 3, maybe 4 actually made the whole thing. There's still these guns being found to this day, or parts of the guns on the track too. That was what their plans was. And that's how they did their movements. So I forgot the original question, but yeah.
Oh, just the difficulty of moving along that track. And it's an important point with the gunners because they'd broken down their guns. Some of the Japanese guns are good little jungle guns. some of them less so, and all of them quite heavy when someone is actually carrying a component of that gun on their back in the heat of the day, particularly if they've been a little bit malnourished. But most of the troops from the Sendai Division would have been in pretty good condition, wouldn't they? They hadn't been in the AO for long.
Just like I said, the 16th and the 29th and the 230th. 230th Regiment was part of the 38th. So they're all three fresh regiments.
Yeah.
And that had to be because the ones that had been on the island a while, they left them to hold the line, hold the coast against amphibious assaults. And also the 4th Regiment was going to do the feint on the mouth of the Matanikau. So, yeah, they wasn't up to the jungle track. So they were very fit guys.
How well defined is the track today?
Yeah, once again, it's just, as you know, in jungle, it could be very defined. No one walked on it, and next year it's just completely overgrown. Yeah, it's just parts that, like around Kukumbana, you can see, and then some of the track around the Lunga River, you can follow bits and pieces of it, but between the Lunga River and Kukumbana and the thick jungle ravines, it's completely grown over. Because the only thing it wasn't a road or a track. I mean, they just hacked out a trail in the jungle, and thousands of guys walked up and down it. And that was it. Then I'd say within 10 or probably 2 or 3 years, it's completely grown over.
So Mariana has got these troops moving down the trail that bears his name. When he gets to the Lunga River, where exactly was he and where exactly did he think he was? Yeah,
so the initial assault day was the 21st of October. That was what was going to be the initial assault day. You've got to remember the combined fleet left, I forgot what date, but they had 2 weeks. 2 weeks of fuel and just 2 weeks of operation. So they're on the move too. So everything's all in strict timetable. So the 21st was going to be the day. So this column is spread out. In fact, the column was so long, they said it took a whole day from the rear to reach where the first started. It would take a whole day. So they're all the rear of the column to the front of the column was a day behind, 24 hours behind. So you got to remember when the first column reached somewhere, it's got to take a whole day for the other ones just to move up and get into a point. So, yeah, they were delayed. He sent on the 19th. I've got it all in my book on top of my head. I didn't write it down. So he was delayed. He sent a message to Hayakataki and said, look, we're delayed. And, okay, we'll delay it a day. So he gets to the Lunga River, I think, because they left on the 16th on the march. He gets to the Lunga River, I think, on the 19th. Or 18th and 19th, something like that. And they had to hold a half a day before they crossed the Lunga because it's still daylight. They didn't want to be seen. So night time comes, they start pushing their guys across there. Then they had to hold up on the Lunga to wait for the rest of the division to show up. So they're in the Lunga for another 2 days. He sends 4 patrols out with the engineers because the engineers are going to, quote, build attack trails or attack path. And the engineers come back and says, we're nowhere close to the American lines. They thought they were only 2 miles away from the American lines. So since the report back, there were 2 miles, and there was something like another 5 miles away from the lines. Because they popped in about 4 or 5 miles south of Henderson. That's where they popped out of the river at and crossed the river. It's a nice place today. It's a big bend in the river. So, yeah, they underestimated it. The next day, had to delay it again. It got to like the attack was going to be the 23rd then. And that's when the rest of the division had moved over, and then they started making their way up.
So what was communications like between the forward headquarters with Murayama and Hayakataki? Because they're trying to coordinate not only with the IJN, but also the attack across the Matanikau.
Yeah, so the communications, they had a lot of runners. They're running field phone lines. That's how they mainly communicated. You read radios and say, no, we wouldn't be running too many radios in there. And runners would take a while. They were doing runners back. But the Japanese used a lot of field phone communication, just like the Americans. So that would be their main primary contact is field phone lines. Because, you know, remember, it's not that hard. You just run a field phone line down the trail as you're going. As long as you have the big long spool, it's pretty good communication. So then once at 17th Army headquarters, and they could use VHF and speak to the fleet or speak to Rabaul, then they could speak to the fleet. So the communication was generally okay, what I've found to be. So now the guys on the Matanikau, they didn't have direct communication with Murayama because what Murayama did, even though the 4th Regiment and the tanks quote, part of the 2nd Division, he's detached himself, and he was controlling the whole envelopment force. So a guy called Major General Suri Miyoshi, who's the artillery commander, took control of the Matanikau sector. So he had direct control of those guys. So Murayama didn't have any control, didn't have any contact with those guys. So the hierarchy set it up that way. So it was almost, and then you had Colonel Oka, who was moving down south to cross the Matanikau and come across too. So you had 3 maneuver elements, all separated from each other. There's almost 3 without support. So 3 moving elements without support from each other. They're all supposed to coordinate and tank at the same time.
And that excluding so Murayama organised his troops, once they got across the Lunga, into a left and a right wing.
Yeah, so basically how the Japanese were going to attack, you had a left wing on the left-hand side, a guy called Major General Nasu. He was the infantry commander, kind of like division second in charge. So he had the 29th Regiment on the left wing. On the right wing was the 230th Regiment under Major General Kawaguchi. So Kawaguchi was given, he had 1 battalion of his old brigade, and he had 2 battalions of the 230th. The 230th was a kind of a famous Japanese regiment. They're the one that took Hong Kong, took the airfield of Hong Kong, 230th. They were, quote, known as the airfield specialists that take airfields. I don't know how that came about, but yeah, I've read that. So they were a pretty good unit too, the 230. And then the 16th Regiment was going to be the reserve unit. So whichever unit moved up, just like normal Japanese tactics, they found the American weak point, and then the 16th was either going to go to the left or right, whichever way that whoever's going to penetrate through. And then the plan was to go one wing, go over Edson's Ridge. The wing on the right was going to go about 600 yards in the jungle flat. And then the 16th, which was potentially going to go on Edson's Ridge, engineers were going to put bridges, little foot bridges. They were going to cross on the left-hand side and come on the Kuma Ridges. So you had 3-prong attack. And it's actually quite interesting. You read the orders. They had orders to individual soldiers. Once you reach the airfield, don't destroy buildings, don't burn anything. If you see any lights, smash lights. If you see any wire, cut wire. But don't destroy any infrastructure. Don't destroy anything, because, once again, they were planning on using that airfield very quickly once they took it. So it's quite interesting reading those individual accounts or individual orders to each soldier.
What was the relationship between Murayama and Kawaguchi?
So Kawaguchi, he wasn't well liked in Japanese high command due to the fact that he kind of rocked the boat a bit. He came up with different ideas, and then he had a falling out in Philippines because he wouldn't execute the Filipino judges and officials. He said it wasn't traditional Bushido, but no, that was him. So he had a falling out. He liked to speak his mind quite a bit and didn't know his place. So, and plus I don't think they knew each other because he wasn't obviously part of the 2nd Division. So I think his reputation kind of preceded him, and he liked to talk a lot. So I don't think from what I've read and what I know that they potentially didn't get along. But I haven't read anything that they hated each other. But yeah, I don't think they were best mates.
And on top of that, we had Tsuji in the mix there, weaving his web of intrigue amongst the senior officers as well. And he wasn't a fan of Kawaguchi at all, was he? No, and you'll see Kawaguchi and Tsuji hated each other, and I think there was the whole Filipino thing. So I think it all kicked off from the episodes in the Philippines, because Tsuji was there or around there. He had something to do with it. I'll have to really read my notes. But they definitely didn't like each other, and it stemmed from years ago. So definitely no love lost between those two. And remember Tsuji. Now, Tsuji, he was the direct representative from the Imperial General Headquarters. So he'd come down, he was the main planner. He was on this march. So he's moving around too with Kawaguchi's group. So he's moving to go down south. So he's moving down south to attack. So he's kind of like the staff officer, eyes and ears, so to speak. He's like a little spy, I guess, but he's there to inform Hikataki if he need to be. I think he's traveling man with Murayama in headquarters. And from the Marine headquarters point of view, Rupertus is in control for this battle. Where was Vandegrift?
So you got to remember, I think we talked last episode when Lieutenant General Thomas Holcomb, the commandant, came to visit. So he came on the 22nd. They left. He took Vandegrift on the 23rd or 24th. Anyway, they flew to New Caledonia to meet Halsey. Halsey wanted to meet. One, he was going to brief Halsey directly. Plus, they were going to push to get some more supplies in. So this goes to show how much confidence Vandegrift had in his staff. He knew that in the time that he was leaving, then it was he shouldn't be leaving as a division general. What I'm trying to say is because everything was going down. But he left. He left for 2 days. Now, he left Rupertus in charge. Rupertus was the assistant division commander. He was over in Tulagi, so they brought Rupertus over. Now, Rupertus gets there. Within a day, he's struck down with dengue fever. He's out for the count. He's sick. So Major General Geiger, the Air Wing commander, takes charge. Now, Geiger goes to Colonel Thomas, who's the chief of staff, who I think I referred to in another episode as the brains of the division. You read Thomas's interview, read some of Geiger's stuff, read some of Twining's stuff, and they're all basically say the same. Basically, Geiger tells Thomas, he says, look, you know what you're doing. You know, you've been doing this since August. Just keep me informed. Any major decisions, run them past me, but just keep what you're doing. Have faith and trust in you. So basically, Thomas was running the show, and he would run stuff past Geiger. So yeah, Rupertus is out. He's out. He's sick. His dengue fever is knocking him. He had a bad case of dengue fever. It kept coming up throughout the campaign.
The meeting that Vandegrift was at was actually a critical meeting, wasn't it? Because it really did. Decisions were made about the future of Guadalcanal, where it was critical to have the commander of the land forces present to be able to brief.
Yeah, Halsey. Now, Halsey, I don't know if we spoke about it yet. Halsey came in, I think, on the 16th of October. He just said, look, now, he thought he was going to come visit Guadalcanal. He was going to visit South Pacific and a bit of a tour. And he got diverted to go to New Caledonia. And there he was given a letter. And he's got to meet Ghormley. And he goes to see Ghormley. And when he opens the letter, it says, now you're the new commander of the South Pacific. Go report to Ghormley. And I think he said, this is the hottest potato they ever handed me. It's like something, I forgot what he said, but generally he said that was the hottest potato they ever handed me. Jesus Christ and General Jackson, I think he said, this is the hottest potato. But yeah, he went in, and then the word that went across the island, that as soon as they knew Halsey was in charge, literally Marines were dancing and hugging each other, and they going, well, we know that these guys are going to fight now. This is Bull Halsey, and his name Bull, because I don't know why his name's Bull, but he's definitely aggressive. He lived up to his nickname. He goes, well, when he went to that meeting, he asked Vandegrift, he says, can you hold? He goes, yeah, we can hold, but we need more support than what you've been giving us. And apparently Halsey, that kind of shamed him a bit. And he goes, you'll get all I have. And then to his credit, he did. He's sent everything he's got to it. He says, well, the Navy's going to fight. And they're just going to go help you out as much as we can. So, yeah, but that turned the tables. In fact, one account, one Marine officer says, just like a shift in a ball game. When the atmosphere changed, you could just feel it. That, look, we think we're going to win now. Or you just feel the whole morale pump up.
And it was a big call for Halsey because he didn't have a lot of ships. He had a lot less ships than what the US Navy started with, and they were losing ships at a significant rate. He understood that this was critical. This was a critical turning point in the campaign, and if the Marines could hold, the Navy needed to do its part to ensure that they would have everything they needed to hold. Yeah,
and he said, I'll give you all I got. And to his credit, he did. Then you started seeing the reinforcement schedules. It came straight after that. The rest of the American division started coming in. The 8th Division the 8th Marines were relieved from Samoa. You started seeing more planes coming in. Everything they had got started going there. And then you're starting to see on the home front, because at this stage in October, they didn't know where Guadalcanal was going to last. And some parts of the American command was starting to prepare the American public for Guadalcanal to fall. And it got to a point where the Germany First policy, I think FDR, the Roosevelt, said, Guadalcanal, this is what you got, go there. Send everything you got to Guadalcanal. I don't care, send everything we've got. So they knew that was an important point. And the Japanese High Command started working out Guadalcanal as the main point. And then finally the American High Command started saying, well, we need to send everything we got to Guadalcanal. They need help, because it's really starting to be big in the American public, and Guadalcanal was all over on the news. The brave Marines and the Navy fighting hard on Guadalcanal. Can they hold? That wasn't all the good stories was coming in from Guadalcanal. But yeah, especially after the bombardment on the 13th and 14th, the Marines' morale went down quite a bit. They said, we don't know we can hold. And then Frank Knotts, the Secretary of, Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knotts, had made this big speech in the States. He's basically saying the Marines won't hold, and when they don't hold. And the Marines were listening to loudspeaker one time, like a news press that came over, and they go, well, no one told us we can't hold. And they started booing a loudspeaker and throwing things at it. And they're like, no one's told us we can't hold. We're gonna hold. The hell with those people. No one's told us that. Yeah, it was good.
It really speaks to the culture and the strength of the leadership that when you hear someone who is so high up in the and so across all of the strategy saying that you can't hold us, like, yeah, no, he's wrong and we're right.
Yeah, but say, no one's told him. He don't know the real deal. We know the real deal. We're here. Yeah, and that's what Vandegrift said. This won't be another battalion, another wait. If we need to, we hit. And they started doing not surrender plans. They were starting getting plans. They were going to like move to the east side of the island. And someone was going to go up in the mountains, and yeah, they started potentially getting plans to evacuate and fight a guerrilla war if they needed to. He said, we won't be surrendering. Yeah.
As opposed to the Japanese headquarters, who had a very similar point of view, because Hayakatake had his plans team working out how they would handle the surrender of the Americans.
Yeah, that was I think that came from a captured document. I think it was Murayama, actually. I think Murayama was supposed to meet Vandegrift at the mouth of the Lunga or Matanikau, I forget which one, and they were going to exchange sword. He was going to get his sword or his pistol, and then they were talking about how they're going to set up the camps for the POWs and get the transports in, and yeah, very arrogant.
Well, how about we come back next week and find out exactly how that plan.
Yeah, it's probably a good point to stop it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your learned insights into this pivotal battle in the Guadalcanal campaign.
Oh, happy to chat, as you know. See you next time. Huh?
A very big thank you there once again to Dave Holland, the author of Guadalcanal's longest fight, The Battles of the Matanikau. There are 3 things to reflect on in this episode. Firstly, Vandegrift is trying to secure Henderson Field. That means to gain possession of and protect personnel, equipment, infrastructure, and information. So for him to be able to do that, he needs to deny the Japanese the ability to get their artillery within range of Henderson Field. That means keeping them on the west side of the Matanikau. They have longer range artillery, however, they don't have them in great numbers, and they certainly don't have great amounts of ammunition for that. Which is definitely a good thing for the Marines because they've got excellent observation posts on Mount Austin. They can see everything that's going on at Henderson Field. So the battle for Henderson Field is going to be the next iteration of Vandegrift dealing with the problem of too few resources for too much terrain that he needs to secure. Secondly, we see the lack of reconnaissance and the lack of C2 within the Japanese headquarters on Guadalcanal, creating a lot of friction that is self-imposed. There are multiple call signs that are manoeuvring. They're trying to coordinate with the Imperial Japanese Navy for naval gunfire support, and yet C2 difficulties and the terrain are conspiring against them. As we look at the actual attack, we will see the penalty that the IGA pay for their inability to coordinate. But lastly, it's important to remember that Vandegrift is adopting a defensive posture because of intelligence about a forthcoming Japanese assault. This is made possible by an increasingly sophisticated intelligence fusion capability that is being developed by the Allies. At the operational level, at this point of the campaign, the Japanese are increasingly on the defensive. A lot of their forces are based at Rabaul, which means that there's much less signals traffic for the Allies to capture and analyse. The Japanese were also changing their codebooks, and that meant that there was a period of time where it was impossible to decrypt any of the traffic that was being collected. Combat intelligence was being generated by the fusion of reconnaissance, coast watchers, aerial photography, prisoner interrogation, traffic analysis, and signals decrypts where it was available. For Vandegrift, this meant that rather than being attacked whilst he was committed to an offensive on the far side of the Matanikau River, he was able to pull back to assume a defensive posture and take advantage of fighting on the defense. He has a lot more flexibility in choosing the terrain where the battle is going to be fought. Once he places his troops, they're going to have time to be able to dig in, and they're also going to know the terrain that they're defending a lot better than the attackers as they move into the assault. He's got the advantage of interior lines of communication, and that means that sustainment of his troops whilst they're in contact is going to be a lot easier than for the Japanese, who are at the end of a very long logistics trail. And lastly, they're going to be able to plan out the indirect fire support in the defence. And as we're going to see, this is going to be a critical advantage for the defenders. We'll leave it there and we'll come back with the next instalment in the Battle of Henderson Field.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.